We see every day that just outside Canada and beyond, rights and freedoms are being ruthlessly taken away. But this is also happening right here at home.
Saskatchewan's government says it will use the notwithstanding clause.
We're going to focus on this piece of legislation, introduce it, and pass it with the notwithstanding clause.
Yes, we're ready to use the notwithstanding clause.
But if the judge disagrees with us, then we would have to consider using the notwithstanding clause.
Ford government is now the first in Ontario history to invoke the notwithstanding clause.
And we use the notwithstanding clause to ensure that happened.
Wait, did they just say the notwithstanding clause? What the heck is the notwithstanding clause? In Canada, we have a lot of rights and freedoms. Most people can take them for granted, or maybe not even know what all of them are, because we rely on them every day, or we think they'll be there when we need them. We can choose who we want to marry. We can believe what we want and practice our beliefs. We can gather together with people who share the same ideas as us. We can form unions, groups. We can organize. We have the right to a fair trial when we're accused of a crime. Everyone's considered innocent until proven guilty. We can speak our mind or protest things that our governments do that we disagree with. But where do all these rights even come from? How are they all protected? Let's find out. Ever heard of the Charter?
When we brought the Constitution home, we decided to do it with a charter of rights and freedoms that would become a symbol not just for all of Canada, but would be a symbol for the entire world.
Maybe you remember this from your high school civics class, or you've heard it mentioned in the news, or maybe you remember it being signed back in 1982. Since then, the Charter has protected fundamental rights and freedoms for everyone in Canada. It's the country's highest law. Because of the Charter, we can, or should be able to, choose how we want to live our own lives. But did you know that these very rights are under attack? Maybe you're a Constitution buff and know exactly what's going on. Or maybe you might be asking, what the heck is the notwithstanding clause? And how can these politicians use it to attack my rights? The notwithstanding clause is a sneaky, small part of the Charter right at the end that essentially gives governments the power to pass laws that they know violate our rights. At the time the Charter was signed, there was a big debate about whether to even include it. Some of Canada's premiers were worried that the Charter would give too much power to the courts and take away their ability to make decisions. They only agreed to get behind the Charter on the condition that this dangerous loophole was included. Critics at the time even said that this clause put our rights at the mercy of 10 provincial legislatures, which can override them at will. The interesting thing was that governments could already go around or limit our rights, when they needed to, through the first section of the Charter. Sidebar, BCCLA actually opposed Section 1 at the time the Charter was drafted, because in our view, it denies what should be the absolute nature of the rights in the Charter. That means our rights should be protected no matter what. Back to our usual programming. Section 1 allows governments the chance to limit our rights, but it also puts up some healthy boundaries, making sure they can't just pass whatever laws they want. But the notwithstanding clause doesn't offer any of this protection. When governments slap the notwithstanding clause on legislation, it overrides the Charter and says the law can operate and the courts can't stop it. The notwithstanding clause gives governments the chance to railroad over our rights in the worst ways possible. And that's exactly what's happening. It used to be a big deal to use the notwithstanding clause. Up until recently, governments used the clause every so often, but not really that much. The ones who did risked a lot of public backlash, and they even risked being voted out. But in recent years, governments are becoming more and more reckless. They're using the notwithstanding clause, as if it's a hall pass, to violate our rights without any accountability. For example, Ontario Premier Doug Ford, this guy, is no stranger to using the clause. In 2018, he halved the number of councillors in Toronto City Council in the middle of an election, a politically chaotic move that a judge said undermines the overall fairness of the election and is antithetical to the core principles of our democracy. Hours after this judgment, Ford invoked the notwithstanding clause. This move made Ford the first Ontario Premier to use the clause. And he didn't stop there. In 2021, Ford tried to limit third-party advertising spending for an entire year before an election, essentially limiting free expression. This legislation was struck down in court because it was clearly unconstitutional. And what did Ford do? He used the notwithstanding clause. In 2022, he tried to use the clause to force unionized workers back to work during a strike. In 2024, Ford asked Ontario mayors to ask him, you heard that right, to invoke the notwithstanding clause to pass more aggressive laws to criminalize encampments, which he did. He hasn't used the notwithstanding clause for this yet, but has said that he will if courts find this law unconstitutional. But he isn't the only premier using or threatening to use the clause. In 2019 in Quebec, the Legault government passed Bill 21 by invoking the notwithstanding clause. This law bans people working in the public service, teachers, lawyers, police, from wearing religious symbols like crosses, hijabs, turbans, and yarmulkes. This law has a disproportionate impact on racialized minorities and particularly Muslim women. People have tried to get courts to declare that this law violates charter rights. But worryingly, the Quebec courts decided that they can't even issue a declaration when the clause is invoked, something which BCCLA, among many others, are fighting at the Supreme Court of Canada. Another alarming use of the clause happened in 2023 when Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe put trans youth at risk by passing a policy that forced teachers to out gender-diverse kids to their parents. This was challenged in court and was found to have subjected gender-diverse youth to irreparable harm. In response, the Saskatchewan government invoked, you guessed it, the notwithstanding clause. These cases really highlight the shift in how the clause is being used in Canada, where we went from seeing the clause barely being used for fear of public backlash to being openly used to target vulnerable minorities, including some groups, like youth, who don't even have the right to vote for the elected officials that make these calls. In BC and New Brunswick, we've also seen politicians talking about using the notwithstanding clause to widen involuntary treatment for drug use. The BC Conservative Party leader John Rustad threatened to use it during the 2024 provincial election. And former New Brunswick Premier Blaine Higgs said before their election that he wouldn't rule it out. And then he lost. In 2024, Premier Danielle Smith in Alberta threatened to use the clause to deny Alberta youth gender-affirming treatment. And in Quebec, Premier Legault has also threatened to use it to ban all prayer in public spaces. We even saw the notwithstanding clause coming into play during the 2025 election, when it has never been used at a federal level before.
I will use Section 33 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
How can we stop this? When the clause was introduced, there was an assumed safeguard that if we didn't agree with the government's use of it, then we could just vote them out at the next election. But as you can probably already imagine, this isn't exactly how it's worked in practice. Some people can't vote, other things happen, people might forget, or public opinion changes. And the end result is that people's rights are violated and our politicians are not held to account. You might ask, hey, why don't we just get rid of it? It's practically impossible to remove it. The Constitution can be amended, but only through a complex formula called the 750 formula, involving the federal parliament and the provincial legislatures. First, resolutions have to be passed by the Senate and the House of Commons, and at least 7 provinces representing at least 50% of Canada's population must also approve. How soon do you think we'll get everyone to agree on this? Not anytime soon, right? So BCCLA is putting all our energy into stopping the clause from being used now. We're challenging it in the courts, we're speaking to media, and we're working with others fighting against the use of the clause. The only way to truly stop governments from using the clause is you. People have been standing up and fighting for their rights before, during, and since the Charter's creation. In 1998, the government in Alberta tried to pass a bill limiting compensation for those forcibly sterilized by the government. After a huge public backlash, the bill was withdrawn in 1 day. When Doug Ford tried to prevent public workers from striking, they did it anyway.
Workers made it clear that they will not tolerate the weaponizing of the notwithstanding clause to strip away our charter rights.
And the threat of a general strike caused him to back down.
Not today, not tomorrow, not ever.
People challenged Alberta's restrictions on same-sex marriage. New Brunswick's Progressive Conservative Party lost their next election in a devastating blow. Groups continue to stand up against Ontario's proposed use of the clause against people who are unhoused. And so many people out in the streets and through the courts are working to take down Quebec's Bill 21. When any part of the Charter is threatened, the whole Charter is threatened. The whole point of the Charter is that it guarantees our rights. If governments continue to use the notwithstanding clause to chip away at our rights in bits and pieces, soon none of the rights enshrined in our Constitution will matter. But you and I aren't gonna let that happen. Politicians think they can get away with this, but you have the power to stop them. Follow our campaign and find out more about what you can do now.